you to this seminar organized by the Turing Center on Emerging Economies, or ET, and to welcome, of course, Francesca Spigarelli, who is the speaker today. I just would like to stress that this seminar is in line with our research activity. We operate in Turin, we organize workshops, we have a website and newsletter. So if you visit our website, you have a lot of information. Our last workshop was held in last December 22, first and second, and the topic was exactly fragmenting a global economy and the role of emerging markets, fragmenting supply and value chain. So this seminar focusing on the semiconductor industry, on the rivalry China-US, especially in line with our research program. So Francesca was introduced by Giuseppe, and nothing to add, not that we are in contact with her China Center, University. We hope to develop further cooperation, as we'll do very soon. Please, Francesca.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you today, and I'm thankful to all the colleagues that invited me, not only Professor Musi for hosting in his laboratory, but also, of course, to the Observatory of Emerging Economy of Turin. So I'm very grateful to Giovanni Balse and to Vittorio Valli, who really invited me here in Turin. And I recently joined the scientific committee of this center. So thank you for inviting me to be part of your project. And I would like also to say hello to the friends and colleagues that are connected online. I see Ignazio Muso and I see Augusto Ninni. Thank you for being connected today, and many other friends from remote. So I just close here. Okay. So we are now closing the door because there is some noise. I know that we are quite tired because you already had one first session today. I would like to share with you some ideas and first insights from a study that I'm developing on the industry of semiconductors. This is quite a hot topic nowadays all over the world, not only in Italy, in Europe, but also in the US, in China, and I would say all around the globe. So I think the topic fits perfectly your laboratory, where you're talking about Asia, Pacific, and not only China, but in general about the role of this part of the world in a global context. And as you will see, this is a very interdisciplinary topic. So I teach applied economics, and usually my research is focused on industrial policies. So policies that are developed by countries to promote the growth of certain industries. And nowadays, this topic is a sort of tool the states use to develop not only an economic supremacy, but it's also about geopolitical dominance. So the use of industrial policy is quite crucial. It's a new sort of weapon that is being used, and this kind of tool, industrial policies, are also developing a sort of new kind of war. It's a sort of a war related to industrial development, economic development, that is causing then geopolitical tension. So the use of industrial policy, not only to promote industrial development, but also as a tool to gain a supremacy that is also very linked to geopolitical supremacy. And it is a very interdisciplinary topic, because when we talk about semiconductor, we really must understand what is the role of semiconductor, not only in the supply chain of several industries, but also the composition of semiconductor. So in this paper, we are putting together different perspectives, and in the team of people that are writing this paper, I also have an expert on geopolitics of China, an expert of geopolitics of the US, and we are really using also technical expertise. So we are talking with engineers, with experts, because we really need to understand how a semiconductor is built. What is the role of raw materials in building the semiconductor? So I will share with you some first insights on this study. It's not still developed, but also, of course, I am an economist. So in this paper, we talk a lot about trade of semiconductor. We talk about global value chain. That is the core focus of the paper. But you will see also some other kind of information that are useful to understand what is going on between Europe, China, and the US. So you have also talked and analyzed the problem of disruption of global value chains, I'm sure, in your laboratory. You have seen that with the global pandemic, several value chains were disrupted. And one of the key vulnerable global value chains has to do with semiconductor industry. You know that semiconductors are used in very strategic industries. Can you name some of this industry where semiconductor is used? Semiconductor is one part of a complex technological chain that is maybe related to automotive. Phones, technology, so the use of technology indeed. So cars, as was already mentioned, but also artificial intelligence, 5G. So all the key industry related to the digital transformation are really sensitive to the use of semiconductors. And we have seen that with the pandemic, we have realized finally that the value chain of semiconductor has some bottlenecks. In some countries of the world, we have production of semiconductors. In other countries, we have the assembly of semiconductors. But the design of semiconductors is done somewhere else compared to where semiconductors are really produced. And then we have machines for the production of semiconductors that are placed somewhere else. So it's a very, very complex industry, and the rivalry for the technological supremacy of China and the US really exploded with the semiconductor war. So you have seen maybe in several other meetings and occasion that you had to talk also with experts that this technological war within China and the US started several years ago and has now come to a very critical moment where the use of industrial policy is central. We will see in a while that the US has developed a specific act to promote the upgrade, the further upgrade of the US industry for semiconductor. The same did China, and the same last month did Europe. So we have several countries in the world competing to become not only self-sufficient for the design of semiconductor, but would like also to get the supremacy of this production, because this production is core to many other key industries. So in this paper, we try to explore how the semiconductor supply chain is shaping the geopolitical tension between Europe, China, and the US, and what is happening with the use of these industrial policies. We are using quantitative and qualitative analysis to understand what is going on. The paper is not finished, so I will not go into deep analysis of some export and import data. But I will tell you a little bit what are the first preliminary results that we are having with this analysis. So first of all, let's start from a definition of semiconductor. What is a semiconductor? I am an economist, so I should not be maybe speaking about this, but it is crucial because the first thing that we had to do when starting this analysis was, what is this about? Raw materials are key to the understanding of what is going on in this trade war. So semiconductor is a material allowing for electrical conduction. So the common use of the term refers to the computer chips or integrated circuits that are made of silicon slices. And the key use of semiconductors, the main types of semiconductors and chips are for processing information. So is a tool, is an instrument to process information, or is a tool to keep information, so to storage information. And the size of the chip is crucial to define the complexity of the technology. So China and Europe and the US in this moment are competing to have the supremacy in the design and production of very, very small chip. We will see in a while. There is an increased demand for advanced chips, the very, very small one, for which China has not a supremacy at the moment. For AI, as you have already said, autonomous driving and 5G. And this value chain of semiconductor is going to increase its value at global level. So the estimates are 1 trillion by 2013. So it's a very rich and important industry, very rich for companies, very profitable for companies, but crucial for states, for nations that want to advance in the level of technology and in the level of development of the digital solution introduced in the state. As I've told you before, there is a different geography in the world at the moment of the semiconductor industry. The US, South Korea, Taiwan, and Europe have good expertise in research and development. So the frontier of innovation is mostly in the US, a little bit in Europe. The key equipment are in the European Union. There is a specific company in the Netherlands that has the supremacy for the production of machines for semiconductor. On the other hand, Asia and China, so the key focus of your laboratory, I think, at the moment are very talented and have developed very good skills and good market share in production, assembly, and testing. But as you may imagine, the high value of this chain is placed where? And the most labor-intensive part is placed where? Right. So the US and the more advanced country are keeping the high value part of the value chain, so design and mostly production of equipment, while Asia at the moment and China are more taking control of the value chain part that are with less value, high intensity of labor, but less value. So we have seen during the pandemic that these value chains that are really global across the globe went interrupted, and geopolitical tension are mounting around this value chain after the pandemic. So trade restriction and geopolitical tension really question the role of global chains and are maybe pushing toward more regional value chains. But what is really important is that states are trying to push towards the building of value chains that are really regional and small. Europe would like its own value chain, US would like its own value chain, and China would like its own value chain that is really resilient to potential crises that are not only pandemic crisis, but could be geopolitical tension preventing the trade flows between countries. Of course, it's very challenging to build new value chains on chips and semiconductor. It's very expensive, requires a lot of money to attract companies to build new plants and to start R&D department in different places of the world compared to the past. So there is this reshaping of the global value chain for semiconductor, because at the moment what we have is this. So you see the different part of the value chain of a typical supply chain in the semiconductor. We have integrated design manufacturers and fabless companies designing R&D for semiconductors. And as you can see, This part is very knowledge intensive, and the major players are placed in the US. Here you have some name, in Taiwan, and a little bit in China. Minor players are also placed in South Korea and in Europe. Another very intensive knowledge and R&D part is related to the building of machines for producing the semiconductors. And here again, we have the US and Europe and a little bit of Japan. The two less R&D intense parts are foundry sector, so production of the parts, where you see more of Asia and less of the Western countries, and the same is for assembling and testing. So at the moment, we have these value chains that are really interdependent. One country cannot do without the other. The US cannot rely on its own, and the same is for China. They have built, in the past decades, a value chain that is spread all over the world, with some leaders that are taking the big value of this value chain, the US, and other countries that are really producing and making the parts of the chip. So let's see what China, the US, and Europe are doing at the moment with this problem. Interruption of value chains during the pandemic, the war, geopolitical tension. Each country is now trying to get rid of this global interconnected value chain to build a supremacy and situation where each country could be self-reliant on the production of value chain. Did you grasp the importance of chip and semiconductor? So they are key for the transformation of the economies towards a more digital world, more technological world. That is something that each country is trying to be part of. And so semiconductors are key to the transformation and development of countries. What is China doing? China has started many decades ago in the 5-year plans that China has developed to upgrade production and to transform China from the state of manufacturing of the world to a powerful nation that is promoting technological innovation. So many years ago already, they started to promote the chip making industry in China with many subsidies from the state. So in this paper, we analyze the Chinese policy towards building a national industry for semiconductors. China's semiconductor supply chain shows resilience despite weaknesses under US pressure, but still there are several technological bottlenecks. And in the actual 14th 5-year plan of China, and the recent law on science and technology progress, China has pushed even more financial support and political support to the development of a more advanced national industry on semiconductors and chips. What is the typical approach of China? I'm sure that you have talked about the 5-year plan of China. So what is the typical approach? You launch a political message pushing a specific industry, and then China and each ministry and regional and local authority develops a specific strategy to reach the goal by 5 years. So we are sure that behind this statement of China to push technological innovation even further in the chip industry is having a huge impact at national level with specific subsidies, financial incentives, and any kind of support that is needed to transform an industry from a good level of innovation to a very high standard level of innovation, including education. So university, R&D, PhD program, all the typical tools that you need to upgrade the country. Priority is given to artificial intelligence, quantum technology, neural networks, genomics and biotechnology, health and science. So these industries are receiving huge attention. And I don't have time to go deep into the analysis of this, but when the paper is ready, I'll send you and you can forward towards the student if you are interesting. So a massive huge of industrial policies that mean a policy promoting not only industry transition, but also education, local development. Everything is aligned to reach this goal of technological supremacy in a time span of at least 5 years. The US, of course, has reacted to this wish of China to become a superpower in the technological domain with a strategy of protecting national R&D supremacy and promoting disruption of global value chains. The US tries to attract investment from abroad to be able to get rid of the China part of the global value chain. So what is the US doing? Export control and restriction to prevent technology spillover to China. So the US is not exporting several parts of the semiconductor value chain to China. And on the other side, we have the CHIPS Act approved last year, pushing research and development in the US to promote a self-reliant industry. This CHIP program is a huge and massive program investing on research and development and in support for the local industry and support to attract foreign investors to come to the US, open branch, open R&D centers. So transforming the US, that is at the moment the leader in this industry, transforming even further the US so that the US could be self-reliant, could be self-sufficient in the whole value chain, because we have seen the several parts of the value chain are covered by other countries. So here I give some details about the centers that are open. So imagine a country really much involved in the promotion of R&D at the best level, attracting talents from all over the world to study how to develop the industry of semiconductor. And this program is made of different parts. So the CHIPS Act is pushing a lot of money to this industry. Several initiatives, and though I don't go deep into the analysis of each industry, but consider that this is the US government aggressive policy to strengthen the semiconductor manufacturing and R&D capability as part of a national plan of security, first of all, but also a national plan to respond to the rivalry with China. We have not mentioned the use of semiconductor in the military industry. I call it industry because it's an industry, but imagine that all these chips, the very sophisticated ones, are necessary for drones, for the remote control of weapons, for artificial intelligence use, also not in our daily life industry, but in the military industry. So this is the reaction of the US. China is growing too fast. We want our own strategy to keep the supremacy that we have at the moment in this industry. Let's see what data about export tells us about this global value chain of the semiconductor industry. What are the relations at the moment between China and the US in terms of export-import of parts of the semiconductor industry? So they are reacting to this geopolitical situation, but what the number tells us about the links that we have between China and the US. Do you think that this war between China and the US, and then we will see Europe in the middle, is really sustainable? Can China do it without the US? And can the US do it without China? At the moment, the answer is no. No at all. They are very interlinked. And the data show us that the US has a supremacy in some part, but still is very crucial to be linked to China for some part. So you can understand why these long-term industrial plans are trying now to get in 5 or 10 years into a situation where these linkages that we see now will not be necessary anymore. So the data that we have now show this very strong relation that we have at the moment between China and the US. So even if they fight for supremacy, they cannot do one without the other. So this is these are some data about exports that we are now using to develop quite complex models. But I just want to give you a general overview also because I know that you have very different background. So some of you are more in the humanities, some are the legal field. So not all of you are economists, right? So I don't go too deep into the quantitative analysis. So let's see I sit down so you can see the screen. During the period January 2019, March 2022, China has imported from the US an average amount of 1.1 billion of electronic integrated circuits and a lot of machines and apparatus for the manufacture of semiconductors. So if you see this graph, you really have the idea of the link between US and China. The imports of electronic integrated circuits has decreased, however, because of the pandemic, but also because of the trade war with the US. So the US has imposed some restriction on exports of parts of the semiconductors, and we can see that on this graph. So China is importing a lot, machines for the production of semiconductors, but also parts of the semiconductors. They don't have the capacity to produce them by themselves, and they have to import. But the US is banning the exports to China, and this is reflected in the data. The commercial flow of silicon dioxide and semiconductor devices between China and the US is not particularly relevant. So we are trying to analyze with the data about export and import the kind of components or parts that are traded the most. Here we see the share of Chinese sectoral exports to the US, so the vice versa, how much China is selling to the US. Over the period January 2019, March 2022, the US market absorbed on average 5.68% of the total of Chinese exports of silicon dioxide and 94.6% of total Chinese export of machine and apparatus. So you see that China is selling to the US, but not so much as the opposite flow. And there's a quite small share of machines that China is able to export to the US. Here the data are split into different parts of this value chain. And the most relevant flows are related to this raw material and to electronic integrated circuits. So this other graph is the share of Chinese import from the US market compared to the total import of the sector. So this gives us an idea of how important for China the US market is as a supplier. And in this period that we analyze, we have seen that 16.4% of the total Chinese import of machine and 4% of the total Chinese import of electronic integrated circuits come from the US. So again, there is a huge dependence from the US of the Chinese producer. Chinese producer must rely on a value chain where key parts of it are in the US. This is something that we already commented. These are only the data that gives me support my idea and our idea about what is going on in this global supply chain of the semiconductor industry. So what are the preliminary results of this trade flow analysis that we are now turning into a very complex network analysis to see the linkages not only between US and China, but China with all the Asia Pacific area and the US with other, let's say, countries that are more close to the Western area. So China imports from the US a huge net value of these electronic integrated circuits and machines, and the US appears to be much more competitive than China in these sectors. So there is a supremacy of the US in these two sectors. China relies on the imports from the US in these two really crucial parts. China is exporting semiconductor-related products to the US, as we have seen, silicon dioxide and semiconductor devices, but their net value is not so particularly relevant. So there is also an opposite flows of exports. China is exporting also some part, but not so relevant. And even if the US is not the only supplier of China, it has an enormous relevance in providing to China semiconductor-related products. This means that if the US raises the barriers towards exports of products to China, the trade war, it will hit severely China. So China will suffer a lot from these bans of export to in the technological field. So there is a technological dependency at the moment of China from the US. And you can understand, looking at this data, why in the 14th five-year plan of China, there is this massive investment of money and a massive political push towards a more independent China from a technological point of view from the US. China has a substantial weaknesses at the moment in the semiconductor value chain compared to the US. And this may encourage the US to adopt aggressive trade policy in the value chain to maintain this technological supremacy. But why was the reaction of the US so strong towards China? Because China is investing a lot of money, is dedicating a lot of energies and a lot of political, let's say, efforts towards improving. And China improves very fast, as China did in many other areas and in many other industries. And so we have these two main actors competing each other, and the tool of competition is industrial policies. Acts plan to develop in the long term a supremacy in the industry and self-reliant industry. Where is Europe? Where is Europe in this global picture? So Europe has discovered that the position of European companies is not so strong at global level, and has realized that this global war between US and China might really affect the competitiveness of several European industry. We are very strong in some industry, but this industry need to use chips, need to use semiconductors, and if we don't have our own strategy for the semiconductor industry, we might stay at the corner of technological development and technological competition at global level. And when did we discover this? Maybe when we discovered also the weaknesses of many other global value chains, as the one, for example, related to the healthcare products during the pandemic. So we have seen that we need our own strategy and our own vision of key industries, among which energy, of course. We have seen the energy shortage and the problem of the energy supply chain only after the war between Ukraine and Russia. We have discovered that the healthcare value chain was really weak in Europe only after the pandemic. And now we have realized that we are weak also in terms of semiconductor after that the trade war between China and the US became really hot. So chip development is, of course, as I told you before, crucial in accelerating the twin digital and green transition. So Europe, that is investing a lot in the green transition and in the digital transition, has realized that Europe needs its own strategy for semiconductor. And so finally, we had in 2021 this position of the Commission Communication 2030, that is the Europe way for the digital decade, that set a target. Finally, we set a target. You might say this could be quite a little bit late compared to China and the US that are now fighting for the supremacy, but in the past really developed their own policies to support this industry. Anyway, we are late, but we arrived somehow. So what is the goal of Europe? Is to have a share in global production capacity of semiconductor to 20% by 2030. So we have set this goal. We want to gain a role in the value chain by 2030. And this Commission communication was followed by a policy program that is called Path to the Digital Decade that reaffirmed this ambition. So keep in mind this goal. Do you have any comment on this goal that Europe is setting? So increasing the role in the production capacity of semiconductor, based on what I told you till now. Keep in mind the value chain. So Europe wants to achieve this 20%. We say, oh, it's good. Why? Where in the chain? At least where in the chain? Which part of the chain do we want to conquer? It's not a unique chain. There are several positions in that chain. So what is production of capacity of semiconductor? Is machine? Is assembling? Is design? Is R&D? What is that? So let's see. Let's try to understand what is going on in Europe, because this is a very broad and general, to my opinion, statement. So last April, on the 18th of April, the Commission reached an agreement of the European Chips Act. So the US had the Chips Act, China had the plan, we had basically nothing. So at least now we have an act where it is stated that we want to move from 9% of production of semiconductor to 20%. So restatement of this goal. It is a package that will be released very soon. So the agreement was just reached. Should pave the way for more government subsidies. So each country will promote subsidies at national state for advanced chip facilities. EU Microchips Research and Development Center, and also some tools to monitor potential supply shortages. So Europe wants to attract in Europe the world's biggest manufacturers of microchips, so this very small one, the very advanced one, so that Europe could become a hub for the production of very sophisticated, the design and production of very sophisticated chips. So here we have an act with some measures, some packages of financial support, some measures that will help Europe and each member state to develop a policy to attract investors from all over the world, to set up R&D centers and plants to design and produce the very small chips. This act will allow EU countries to subsidize novel chip equipment and design facilities. So here we have a policy, we have a document that is showing the industrial policy of Europe around this industry, but still we might have some comments to this act. So what would you say? I mean, I just give you free information, so it's very basic information about what is going on. If there are some experts among you about law, about antitrust, about support from the state to the single countries, to the single industry, sorry. Competition. It's about competition. Crowding out effect that we might have. And also competition among states. Because here we have Europe launching an industrial policy for all. And then we will have the choice from an investor to set up a plan. Where should I go? In Italy, in Europe, in Sweden, in Italy, in France, in Sweden, where in EU? Where should I set my chip production or R&D department? So this act that was really due, maybe because Europe needed to have a policy, First of all, it's late. It's quite late because the US is still has been attracting many investors for opening plants, and China did the same in Asia. Europe now intends to attract new producers from all over the world. It's a little bit late. And also, how will this policy provoke maybe some competition between different European states? So this is another challenging aspect to consider. The use of subsidized intervention also is not very easy to understand. So there is a policy that needs now to be translated into national priorities. Imagine how much time Italy will spend on developing our own policy for industrial development of the semiconductor industry. We have some key player in the semiconductor. We have SMT Electronics, that is a major player at national level, but let's see if Italy will be able to develop a policy that is very urgent, and we cannot really waste some time. So, final consideration, then we open the floor to discussion, to questions from you. First of all, the trade war between China and the US and the tech war between these two powers are suggesting us that in the past, in the history, we have seen that tech transfer took place from developed to non-developed countries. In the global value chain of semiconductor, we see that some developing or emerging economy have a key role in the value chain. So we have South Korea, we have China, we have Taiwan. We have advanced knowledge also in some less developed or emerging countries. So the flow might be reversed. So tech transfer could also happen from emerging and advanced economies to the US or to Europe especially. And the events of the past year, so the trade war, the Ukraine war, has highlighted some dangers of value chains that are really global. So all different areas of the world are trying to redesign value chains at different levels. You have seen many other value chains. The semiconductor is one of that. The restructuring of some critical supply chains away from China, but away in general for countries that are far from the home country is crucial. We have seen with the global pandemic, it was not a matter of getting rid of China. It was a matter of having a supply network that is very close to Europe, for example. So there is this aspect of reshaping global value chain. And our data analysis show that as the literature and official policy document reveal, the US export is much bigger, and the US could really freeze the China race to technology if the export ban become really hard, because China is still dependent at the moment from imports from the US. US wants to prevent the Chinese rise in semiconductors from being as preponderant as that which has occurred in other technological sectors. So there is a fear that China might develop so quickly as China did in many other technology, where China is now very much advanced compared to the US. 5G, artificial intelligence is an example. Of course, China needs some time to build these semiconductor value chain at home. It has to attract talents, it has to attract investment, especially in the upper part of the value chain. And this takes time. So this fight between US, China, and Europe will take some time to be settled. And in the meantime, what I see is the growing importance of regional trade and investment agreement. Very local agreement at level of trade and investments. That is something that maybe you are working on in this laboratory, that become crucial because you need to shorten the distance between several suppliers. You need to shorten the distance covered by a supply chain, not only for geopolitical reasons, but also to be able to recover from interruption of the value chain. And this is crucial in the in the tech war. Europe, we are in Europe, so it is important to have our European vision. So there is a huge room for study in this domain. What is the position of Europe? Studies in the geopolitical science, political science domain, but also in the technological field. You've seen the Ursula von der Leyen underlined these keywords in describing China. Europe is confronting with China in a quite complex way, because on one side we have Ursula von der Leyen that is talking about systemic rivalry. On the other side, we have France, we have Germany that are still developing a lot of agreement at trade and investment level with China, because China could be a strategic competitor and not a rival. So we have a very fragmented vision in Europe. On one side, there is this broad opinion that China could be considered a rival. On the other side, if you look at the trade flows and investment flow between Europe and China, you see that Europe and China are very much integrated, much more integrated than US and China. So this is what is happening now in the global value chain of a semiconductor. We are still elaborating several data, and I leave you here some references that maybe could be of interest. And I hope that you have some question and curiosity about this study that must be framed within the more general topic of innovation upgrade of the emerging world, where in the emerging world, I put China, I put India, and many other emerging countries that maybe it's time not to call emerging anymore, because they have gained a maturity also at technological level that is very advanced, much more advanced sometimes than the one in the US and the one in Europe. So I hand here the presentation so we can have some time for debate and for question. Thank you.